Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, and we're going to talk about Chris Cox, the new Hasbro CEO, who used to be the Wizards of the Coast CEO. All right, this is brand new, hot off the presses news that speaks a lot about Hasbro itself, Wizards of the Coast, Dungeons & Dragons, and the future of Dungeons & Dragons, specifically in Wizards of the Coast. So let's talk about this. This is a major new occurrence. So this got announced on January 5th, 2022. We're into a brand new year, and there's this huge announcement, right, from Wizards of the Coast. Now, this actually, boy, I will tell you. Okay, let's talk about Mastering Dungeons, okay? So I'm going to get back to Chris Cox story, but I am so excited. I will tell you right now. I keep telling you 5e is the thing, and more I'm like, do I even need to say this? It's so shockingly clear. All right, if you don't know, let's play it all the way through. Sly Flourish, just an amazing YouTuber, D&D commentator, YouTuber who just works so hard and does such a great job. Creates he just created Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. Brilliant product. He is a treasure to the Dungeons & Dragons community, right? He keeps pointing and saying, hey, I know you guys are I listen to this hour-long scree every week now, and I love it. It's really good, right? But he is just such a wonderful commentator, really sets the bar high for all of us, and I'm really encouraged by his work, and I really want to point you guys to it. His name is Sly Flourish. His real name is Mike Shea. He's the son of the guy who wrote the Illuminatus trilogies, one of the dudes who wrote the Illuminatus trilogy back in the late 60s, I think. So his dad is like a famous author, right? But he has been pointing toward Mastering Dungeons, which is a podcast. Oh yeah, I know it's a problem, right? I think you can watch it on YouTube, but this podcast is worth finding. And if you're listening to me, I know you know how to go find a podcast, right? This is the deep end of the pool here. Nobody who has a casual interest in Dungeons & Dragons is listening to this channel. I'll tell you that right now, right? So basically, it's totally worth going for. It's Mastering Dungeons. The first half of the show every week is 30 to 40 minutes every single week of news that is just Dungeons & Dragons news, right? There's a little bit of tabletop role-playing game news in there, but generally their focus is Dungeons & Dragons, and then they use the second half of the conversation to just talk about books that have come out. I listen to it every week. Mike Shea is 100% right. This is brilliant coverage. Nerd Immersion is doing great work. There is so much news, you can fill a podcast with just the news from Dungeons & Dragons every single week. And the reason why is every move Dungeons & Dragons makes, every move Wizards of the Coast makes is news, and everybody wants to hear it. And guess what? It ain't just the D&D now, people. It's the D&D then, people. It's the D&D not, people, right? Like, people who aren't even playing D&D news have an insatiable appetite for Dungeons & Dragons news. And you can go on to tons and tons of D&D not commentators who talk nothing but D&D, talk tons and tons about D&D now, right? It's incredible, right? So one of the major news stories is that the Wizards of the Coast CEO, okay, now this is way above Ray Winninger, right? This is above the design lead, the D&D design lead, okay? Basically, you have Chris Cox was CEO of Wizards of the Coast. I think he was there for about 5 years. Okay, the Hasbro CEO died last year, literally died, right? And then what ended up happening is there was an interim CEO. I think his name was Ray Stoddard, I think. And so he was an interim. He's going on to the Hasbro board, and Chris Cox is moving from being the Wizards of the Coast CEO to the Hasbro CEO. That is a big deal. What that says is that Wizards of the Coast has been successful, right? They had an interim. They said, we don't know who's going to be the lead of of Hasbro. And then they're like, we know. It's going to be the Wizards of the Coast guy who's been doing his thing for years. And we like what's happening over at Wizards of the Coast, right? Now you're like, well, wait a second. Wizards of the Coast owns Magic the Gathering, which is highly successful. That is no two ways about it. I think the Magic the Gathering makes 5 to 10 times the money that Dungeons and Dragons makes, right? However, right, Dungeons and Dragons is the most historical thing that Wizards of the Coast owns, and they protect it very, very carefully. One of the things is that I want you to think about, Wizards of the Coast does not make any other tabletop role-playing games. They're like, hey, we own the biggest and the best tabletop role-playing game on the planet. It doesn't compete with a single tabletop role-playing game in the world. It competes with the entire industry and routinely destroys the entire industry, right? Like competing against it, right? Like, and so they're like, we're not gonna lose focus, right? And the reality is, by Hasbro saying Wizards of the Coast CEO is now the Hasbro CEO, what they're really saying is we are very down with what's happening with Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons, right? And the reality is, why wouldn't they be, right? There are 33 books that have been released for Dungeons and Dragons since 33 separate books that have been released for Dungeons and Dragons since like June of 2014, 2,780 days, right? 33 books in 2,780 days. Those books are selling better than anything in the entire industry. Basically what Chris Cox did, right, with Dungeons and Dragons is said, we've always done well, right? But I put a multiplier on Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition success. And if you look around, look at the rest of the hobby. You know what the rest of the hobby is doing? It's making a few individual, independent tabletop role-playing games, but virtually every single genre, everything under an independent label is saying, do we make a 5e? And the answer for most of them is yes, right? People are making 5e settings. People are making sure that their stuff is compatible with Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons continues to eat the tabletop world, right? Like, and the reality is that's Chris Cox and the Hasbro CEOs were like, hey, you know what's happening with Magic the Gathering and what's happening with Dungeons & Dragons? The way it, like, we had the world crack in half starting in March 2020 and it did nothing but help Dungeons & Dragons. Chris Cox did that, and we want that for every single brand under the Hasbro label, right? And so it's really, really, this is a major, so by Chris Cox being elevated from Wizards of the Coast CEO to Hasbro CEO says Hasbro thinks Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons are the future of Hasbro as far as what they're doing, how they're crushing it. The success they have is wanted by the business people, right? This is all good. It's all positive for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and it all carries the banner of Gary Gygax, right? Dungeons & Dragons is Gary Gygax. Gary Gygax is Dungeons & Dragons, and not from 1974 to 1986. It's from 1974 to 2074 and beyond, right? Nothing in the world carries that Gary Gygax's name better than Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and I'm very, very proud of the work that Chris Cox did, and I'm wonderfully happy that Wizards of the Coast CEO is now Hasbro CEO. And I will tell you right now, this puts major kibosh on the talk that Dungeons & Dragons would be sold, right? And there were some pieces of evidence in 2021 that they were angling to sell Dungeons & Dragons. I think that's done here. I think Wizards of the Coast Hasbro CEO Chris Cox becoming Hasbro's CEO, he ain't gonna let that gem in his crown go, right? He's gonna keep it right there. all that is my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of Chris Cox being promoted from Wizards of the Coast CEO all the way up to Hasbro CEO? How do you think that? I think this is great news for Dungeons and Dragons, and a very specific acknowledgement that of a job well done. All that's my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.